If you hate stupid HOAs and love to see them get taken down, this video is just for you. HOA board demanded my supplies and entry to my home during the 2021 winter power outage. Attempted break-in when I refused. Posted by I'm Just a Neighbor. I live in a neighborhood that an HOA was formed in over a decade ago. I was essentially raised by my grandparents because my own parents really didn't want me and just wanted my little sister, whom they repeatedly said was the one they did not regret. I was born from an accidental teen pregnancy, and my parents showed very little love for me. So from age of 10, my grandparents raised me, and they left me their house when they passed away. I never married, just wasn't interested, but I am a bit of a paranoid man with keeping supplies stocked. When COVID hit, I already had a generous supply of soap, sanitizer, toilet paper, paper towels, disinfectant, bottled water, canned food, medical supplies, and even whiskey. And I still keep all of that well stocked. But it was from years of buying that stuff little by little. I also have a generator and a generous supply of filled propane tanks for heat and some insulated sleeping bags. I wish I had a wood stove too, but the house wasn't built with one. The HOA and I also did not get along. My grandparents turned down their invitation to join, and so did I when I inherited the house. Most of the time, the HOA left me alone. However, back then, the president would come to our door to say something whenever he had a bone to pick with us. It never got him far, and I did kind of find it amusing to see how my grandpa would send him packing. When the pandemic hit, word spread about my stash of supplies. I willingly shared it with some of my neighbors and friends, but certainly not with anyone on the HOA board, as they've been a thorn in my family's side for years. When the HOA was formed, they demanded for months that my grandparents join, and they had the balls to try numerous underhanded tactics, all of which I documented in various ways. They thought they could pick on an elderly couple and say they were members whether they liked it or not. They stated rules that they completely made up and repeatedly threatened us, even saying they would come into the house to take away our guns because the HOA didn't approve of any firearms. We checked their bylaws, and there was nothing about guns on it. In fact, they were trying to force the same thing on some of the other residents, all of whom fought back. And that fake bylaw was soon dropped when there were talks of rebellion. But the HOA still didn't leave us alone. I convinced my grandparents to let me install CCTV so I could catch every further interaction of the HOA board showing up, demanding my grandparents join and threatening them. This turned out to be a very good idea, as the HOA attempted to have all 3 vehicles towed from my grandparents' driveway. We confronted the tow truck driver that was attempting to take my grandpa's old wagon, and he said to take it up with the HOA, as they were authorized to tow from them. When we told them that our house was not a part of the HOA, the driver didn't care and took the car anyway. We called the police to get the car back, and the police had to talk to the HOA board, who were forced to admit being in the wrong as they were all sniveling cowards. The police then had some words with the tow company, and they brought the car back free of charge. The tow driver glared at us after he put the wagon back, and he never returned. Well, that incident was the final nail in the coffin, and my grandpa started a lawsuit against the HOA board for harassment, and when their lawyer saw my pile of evidence, he told them to just settle out of court. The HOA paid the court and lawyer fees, and my grandparents got a few grand on top of that. From then on, the HOA board stayed far away from us, but there was obvious animosity. They even tried to get our neighbors to shun us, which did not work out. When I inherited the house from my grandparents, the HOA already knew me well, and they didn't really bother to try and pull the same stunts of harassment they had before with my grandparents. But they did try once to empathetically suggest I join. But I told them to kick rocks, and I'll leave them alone if they leave me alone. If not, they were free to answer to my 12 gauge and police, as I'm not the type of person to hesitate in defending myself or calling the cops if the HOA starts making trouble with me. I would also have no problem suing for harassment like my grandparents did. It was clear to them that leaving me alone for the moment was the better choice. So that was supposed to be the last time I had any trouble with them. At least until the incident a couple of years later that I'm about to describe. As supplies became available again in late 2020, I replenished my stock. However, the 2021 January ice storm hit my area hard, and we were without power for over a week in the dead of winter. And I was the only person in the neighborhood properly prepared for it. I had some neighbors with generators, but many of them ran out of gas to generate power within a few days. My generator wasn't enough to power my whole house, just key things like my fridge and freezer, my microwave, and a few other necessities. I kept my house warm with propane, and I had battery-powered lighting, plenty of books to read, portable DVD players, my laptop, and I had a large number of filled propane tanks in a variety of sizes at the ready to keep warm with. So I was A-okay. My neighbors, not so much though. No one could drive anywhere. It was about minus 15 degrees Fahrenheit outside, if not colder. There was debris everywhere from fallen trees, and the ground was covered in a sheet of very slippery ice that was on top of snow. And there were many fallen trees, some of which completely blocked the roads. My next door neighbors, who were friends of mine, were having a very hard time keeping warm. At the time, they had a baby who was only a few months old, and they were not prepared for the outage at all. And there was one more family across the street whose house had a tree fall on it. So I invited both families into my home. I also took in a retired elderly couple from a few houses down that were freezing because they had no form of heat. All of those people stayed with me for the duration of the outage. I invited the first family over right after the power went out because I knew they were not prepared. And the family whose house was damaged by a tree, I brought over while the storm was still going on in the middle of the night. When the tree landed on their house, it took out an entire section of it and exposed the inside of the house to the elements. The father of the family came to me in a panic, and I tied a rope to my porch and we made our way to his damaged house to get his family back to mine. We used the rope to pull ourselves back to my house because of all the ice, darkness, and storming frozen winds. I managed to get the whole family over, and after the storm was over, they also brought what supplies they had, including more propane, another generator, and more gasoline they'd been storing. That all went pretty far for heating and powering my house. I had more than enough supplies for all of us, and collectively, we had a myriad of electronic devices to use, many of which were rechargeable, but I had a lot of batteries for those that weren't, and those were great at keeping kids entertained. They also had handheld gaming devices of their own, and we were able to keep charged thanks to the generators. I wasn't used to living with other people since my grandparents died, but it felt good to help them out. Then, there was an elderly couple down the street, all referred to as George and Gracie, that came to stay with me too. They were good friends of my grandparents, so I checked in on them and found out that they had no heat without electricity and were sitting in a running car just to use the heater in that. George had just barely managed to chip off enough ice to get the car door open so they could sit in it. I brought them in, and they sort of became like the temporary grandparents of the house and helped look after the kids. The HOA board, though, was somewhat aware of my supplies, and they could easily see my house was thriving during the outage. So they came over in a group to talk to me on the second day of the outage. They had some idea of having everyone in the HOA board go stay in one building, and they wanted that building to be my house because I already had supplies and heat. I told them that I wasn't hosting their group in my home. I was already taking care of 2 families and an elderly couple not related to me, and that was enough. I got a lecture on being neighborly from them, but I just lectured them back that I had made my decision and to look for somewhere else to bundle up. And besides that, I clearly did not trust them for obvious reasons. And they were the last people in the neighborhood that I'd let into my home. Then I shut my door in their faces. If I had hosted all of those entitled people and their families, my house would have been beyond crowded and all of my supplies would have been taken from me. In situations like those, people will resort to taking and calling it sharing. I wasn't about to risk that. But I did still hand out water and sanitizer to neighbors that came by. The HOA board wasn't done with me, though. On the third day of the outage, they crowded at my house with their families, demanding to be allowed entry into my home. I told them I had no room and to leave me alone. The HOA board didn't take no for an answer though, and they tried to force their way in. But I am not a small man. I knocked their leader right down and off my porch and told them that if they tried that again, I'd make sure to notify police later. I was then backed up by the other men I'd taken in, and they were armed. The HOA president yelled at me that they were all freezing and they needed entry. But I was already hosting 10 people in my house and giving out supplies to neighbors. I wasn't going to take on any more. Then I told the HOA board to leave or I'd be getting my shotgun. Well, after they left, the two dads, George and I, had a bit of a meeting and decided we needed to take turns keeping watch. I'll refer to the dads as Dad 1 and the other as Dad 2 in the order of which I invited them over. And George as George, of course. For an old man in his 70s, he had some strength and grit to him, like a man 20 years younger. We all agreed there was no way those butts of the HOA board would take this all lying down. At times like this, men will become animals to get what they want. So, we all started taking shifts guarding my house and supplies. I slept on my couch with my 12-gauge next to me, and on that very night, I got woken up by Dad 2, who was currently on watch yelling for me. I came running into the garage to find Dad 2 against the garage door and holding it shut. He said there were people outside trying to force it open. It was right about that moment we heard a very loud gunshot. It turned out to be George at my back door. He'd grabbed his own shotgun that he'd brought from his house and fired it into the air outside when he caught two men in my backyard trying to get in through my door. Dad 1 woke up and came running out to help, and we all ran into the backyard. We found my side gate had been forced open. The old latch had been broken. We made our way out front from there and saw roughly 10 people trying to run across the road with weapons in hand, like bats and claw hammers and crowbars, and they were repeatedly slipping and falling on the ice that covered the road. All of them were the HOA board members and people related to them, like their teenage sons or brothers. We blinded them all with 1,000 lumen flashlights and rounded them up at the edge of the sidewalk. We had them all drop their weapons, and George mused that we should break a few of their fingers just to scare them a bit more. They all begged us not to report them to police, and I said to never come back or the next time somebody might get shot. They skittered off like frightened children trying to run across an ice rink. We did a makeshift repair on my gate to keep it closed, and the rest of the week all 4 of us spent nights on guard. We played lots of cards and board games, drank whiskey, and did regular patrols around the house. No one from the HOA board came back to bother us. There was an occasional knock for help from someone needing something though, and the neighbors were really needing water and I was running out of it. So I'd taken to melting ice in pots and boiling it with an electric hot plate, then filling jugs. That gave several of my neighbors clean drinking water. The rest of the outage was otherwise uneventful until the thaw kicked in and more stuff started falling as the ice broke apart. When the ice and snow had all cleared up, the widespread damage was pretty evident. It took the county months to clean up all the debris. We found out later that the other neighbors had followed our example and basically banded together 3 or so families per home to try and stay warm and share supplies. Pretty much, the whole of the HOA board wasn't welcome to join in since they were hated by pretty much everyone by that point. So they all had to band together in the one house they owned that had a wood-burning stove, and they burned pretty much anything they could get their hands on, some of which they took from neighbors. There was evidence of repeated thefts and vandalism all over the neighborhood. Haha, and the key suspects were the HOA board and their families. But none of the neighbors could prove it was them. My CCTV was off due to the power being out, but we made sure that all of our neighbors knew we'd caught the HOA board trying to break into my house. After the power was finally back on, there was a lot of work to do. Like Dad 2 making an insurance claim to fix his house. Dad 2's family actually ended up staying with me for a while longer before the home repairs could really get started. George and Gracie's old house suffered a few broken pipes due to the freezing cold. But George is a retired plumber, so he handled it. A large limb had fallen on Dad 1's car and did enough damage that it was later considered totaled. I didn't really have any time to help any of them out much, as I had to go back to work a couple days after the power was back on, and I was kept very busy for a while. Being sick of the HOA board, the bulk of the neighborhood filed in February to have an emergency HOA meeting, and in said meeting, they wanted the entire board to resign. They refused to step down, and the residents had to get lawyers involved. It did go to court, and the HOA itself was found to be violating the law several ways and embezzling funds. The entire HOA was shut down pending a full investigation. At first, it was just a temporary shutdown, and then it became permanent. All of the former board members have left the neighborhood, and I ended up making some great friends with Dad 1 and Dad 2, and we're regular backyard drinking buddies. I pay a visit to George and Gracie now and then too. They've all taken to keeping supplies like I have as well, just in case this sort of thing ever happens again. This story of a terrible HOA is called Can't Build a Bridge Across the Supply Ditch, Move Your Supply Ditch, posted by Snow Inferno. The backstory. My grandfather owned some 14 acres of land. There was a state-owned water supply ditch running between the top half and the bottom half of this acreage. To use official roads to get from the top half to the bottom half required a 5-mile detour that Gramps had had enough with. The history. A neighbor had been granted the appropriate permits and everything required to build a bridge across the supply ditch a half a mile or so up the ditch. A neighbor of his was disgruntled with the bridge, hooked up some chains to his tractor, and pulled that sucker down right into the supply ditch. The state or county banned building bridges across the supply ditch because of this jerk and the debris that was dropped into the supply ditch. The compliance. He'd had enough driving 10 minutes around to get to the other plot of land and decided that he wanted to build this bridge. Upon learning of the prohibition of bridges across the ditch, he took it upon himself to resurvey his land and the rights granted to the state for the supply ditch to bisect his property. It turned out the state built this ditch just 20 feet away from the actual right-of-way that was granted to them for the ditch. He got into a lengthy fight over it with the water board, and it finally came down to an ultimatum. Let me build my bridge or move your supply ditch to the proper location. Ultimately, he won this battle, and that summer began construction of the abutments and purchased a railroad car which was cut in half and the halves placed side by side across the abutments and the supply ditch. I still remember going out to his farm that summer and sandblasting those railroad cars and then painting it with a special paint to prolong the life of the bridge. The epilogue. Years after the bridge was built, the land above the ditch was subdivided and placed in an HOA, the bridge being the property of said HOA. Parcels of the subdivided land were sold off and people moved in and built homes in this HOA. These fools couldn't be arsed to meet once a year, have an official minutes of this meeting, and pay a minimal amount to keep the HOA running and the bridge under their control. Dad and I went out there to try and fix it up after they let this crap lapse and got everything reinstated. Everything is hunky-dory again, and these morons are warned that we're not traveling halfway across the country again to fix their screw-up. What did they do? They let that crap lapse again. The HOA is dissolved, and as far as we know, the bridge now belongs to the county, who can open it up for public use so everybody above the ditch can make use of it instead of driving 5 miles around to get to the main highway. Roommate stole from me, so her wallet vanished, posted by Charming University 98. Back in college, I had better credit than my 3 other roommates, so I put our internet and TV under my name, otherwise the deposit would have been $600. The cable company offered me a $300 Visa gift card upon sign-up. 2 months later, I called them because the gift card never arrived. They tell me they sent it a few weeks ago, and eventually I'm able to find out from Visa that someone used it at the Whataburger, Target, and liquor store near my house. I'm ticked off because obviously one of my roommates has used it, but I don't know which one. A few weeks later, roommate number 2 complains that their $200 birthday gift card to Target has gone missing. His mom still had the receipt, and the store was able to tell her that someone used it at the Target near our house. He's obviously ticked off too, but we've now realized it's probably one of the other two roommates. Couple of weeks after that, roommate number 3's wallet disappears. We turned the house upside down looking for it, and we knew it had to be in the house because her car key is attached to her wallet and her car is parked at the house. She is absolutely frantic, sobbing, screaming, hyperventilating, and so on, throwing crap everywhere and just having an absolute meltdown while tearing the house apart. We had never seen her behave like this, so we're all kind of surprised that she'd be that upset about her wallet. It's stressful, sure, but I genuinely was concerned about how she was reacting. She says the gift card thief must have taken it, implying that it's roommate number 4, the only person who hasn't had something stolen yet. A few days after that, I found her wallet in the trunk of my car. We had gone to get groceries together, and I guess she just laid it in the trunk while we were unloading. I'm like, holy crap, I found her wallet. And then I open it up because I'm just excited to confirm that I did indeed find her wallet. Bam! Both stolen gift cards, front and center. No doubt. The Visa gift card has my name printed on it, and roommate number 2's mom had written something in Sharpie on his gift card. I realize she had a meltdown because she was afraid we would find out that she was the thief. I left the wallet, cash and all, right where it was, pushed up against the inner lip of the trunk so you couldn't see it unless you leaned farther into the car. The locksmith wouldn't make her new keys without the title, and the title was in the glove box of her locked car. All in all, she spent about $500 replacing her driver's license, title, and keys, not to mention not being able to drive her car for 2 weeks. I moved out of state with her wallet still in my car, finally tossed it in the trash several months later. Sometimes the universe assists you with the petty revenge. I did not expect this to take off. Sorry if you see this, Chelsea, it was me. This happened 10 plus years ago, and I'm happy to report that we've all gone to therapy since then and are thankfully no longer terrible human beings. Now, a couple of things to address here. Why didn't I confront her? I hated confrontation, was a huge people pleaser, and wanted everyone to like me, and enjoyed watching her suffer. Again, therapy. I'm thankfully no longer like this. Visa gift cards don't have names. Google Comcast Visa promo card real quick. The Target gift card itself said happy birthday, and my friend's mom wrote to my favorite son underneath. It was still semi-legible when I found her wallet. Locksmiths don't make car keys? Apparently some do. In the end, she had her car towed to the dealership. I do remember she called a locksmith the first day her wallet was missing because she initially thought the wallet was in her car. She was super mad that the locksmith charged her for the weekend visit without actually unlocking her car. Was he taking advantage of a stupid college girl? Maybe. This was over a decade ago. I was 21, and I'm sure my vodka-addled brain did not fully absorb the details of her whole ordeal. Turn her into the cops. Bro, have you met college students? Do you know how much illegal crap they do? It briefly crossed my mind, but petty revenge was far more satisfying. She had an absolute meltdown and missed a few days of work at a newish job dealing with all this. Commenter says, she left the stuff she stole in your car and kept her title in the glove box? She's a dumb thief. And OP says, extremely. Yeah, some people have their eyes set on something so hard they neglect everything else and do stupid stuff. HOA lawsuit. We take the HOA to court over this, but we aren't even in the HOA. Click the video on your screen so you get the fallout of this crazy story. You don't want to miss it, and I'll see you there.